A Pandemic Doesn't Pause for War by Madison Weiss, Briana Kincaid, and Erin Murphy. Our table of contents for this presentation. First, we will discuss the headline in which we have chosen. Next, we will discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic is faring in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We will then talk about Ebola in Ukraine and connect the two, creating a parallel between a historical pandemic and the current pandemic. And then we will discuss our information credentials by establishing our information's credibility. Infectious diseases ruthlessly exploit the conditions created by war, said by Dr. Bruce Aylward, Senior Advisor at the WHO. Our headline. There are many different aspects that are exacerbating COVID within Ukraine. However, our focus on this presentation is that of medical care and medical resources and Ukrainians' access to those. So the current situation concerning COVID within Ukraine. Large numbers of people in Ukraine are at risk of severe disease, and here is why. According to a CNBC article, oxygen, a medical resource that is essential in the healing of COVID victims, is critically low. WHO reports that at least 3 oxygen plants within Ukraine have already been shut down because of the conflict that is ensuing. A surge in COVID cases without access to oxygen would prove devastating. Yet the reality of the COVID situation within Ukraine is actually hard to detect. A lack of health professionals, healthcare facilities, and COVID tests mean there are extremely low rates of testing. The inability to know whether or not one is infected, coupled with the inability to quarantine, will exacerbate COVID spread tremendously. According to the WHO Director General Tedros, medical supplies that was delivered to Kiev before Russia invaded the nation, these resources are actually currently inaccessible. A Forbes article further comments on the lack of accessible COVID vaccines, in which the significant conflict has disrupted vaccine campaigns and destroyed vaccine supplies. Therefore, the inability to get vaccinated, coupled with the fact that only 35% of Ukraine's population is fully vaccinated, increases the risk of severe disease. The Forbes article, and one by the Washington Post, says that the inability for Ukrainians to seek medical assistance in other countries will be further limited as countries are posting COVID entrance regulations and thus increasing the potential for high death rates. The European Commission is urging individuals to bring their COVID-19 vaccination certificates with them, as those may be required to enter other countries. In Italy, for example, the Prime Minister has stated that Ukrainians without vaccination records won't be able to enter unless they pay for a COVID-19 test every 48 hours to access public transportation and hotels. With only 35% of Ukraine's population vaccinated, an abundance of individuals seeking aid may not be able to receive it, especially since foreign nations are unable to provide medical assistance and resources directly to Ukrainians within Ukraine. Nations around the world then are pulling together to send medical help to the countries that border Ukraine. This way, there will be enough hands and resources to assist those in need, in hopes that they can get there. A solution? According to Dr. Bruce Aylward, the Senior Advisor at WHO, he says to stop the war. If you want to stop infectious disease, if you want to stop the risk and stop everything else, you need to stop the war. Here, I've provided you a map of several of the health facilities that have been impacted by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Many of these are hospitals within Ukraine. In this picture, this is the devastation that ensued after a targeted Russian attack on Mariupol's Children's Hospital within Ukraine.
Thank you, Madison. She just addressed the ongoing headline in Ukraine, and I will be covering a past conflict that took place during the Ebola virus pandemic in a different region of the world. Ebola and access to medical supplies throughout 2018 to 2020. A historical pandemic that took place during a time of war was Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Primarily eastern regions of the country were faced with the civil war. The ongoing conflict made it difficult for healthcare workers to identify and contain cases. There are other critical components such as contact tracing, surveillance, and vaccination, which all had to be suspended until the conflict in certain areas simmered because there were incidents of kidnapping and killing of healthcare workers. 3 treatment centers in different areas were individually targeted during these attacks. While vaccination effectively contained smaller pockets of the outbreak, incidence rates still increased as a result of spikes in conflict. War in combination with the political halt of the election led to controversy around the Ministry of Public Health. Many felt that the increase in awareness of the Ebola virus contributed to the civil war. Figure 1 on the left shows spikes in Ebola cases when conflict would flare up in 6 different regions of Democratic Republic of Congo. And figure 2 on the right shows the specific regions in the Democratic Republic of Congo where conflict erupted throughout the Ebola virus pandemic between 2018 and 2019.
Thank you, Erin. Now, most of us have seen the devastating attacks in Ukraine right now, whether it's on the news or in social media. But do we really know about the parallel between Ukraine and similar attacks that happened in the Democratic Republic of the Congo during the Civil War? Although Ebola itself was a deadly disease, which nearly killed over 2,200 people by mid-2018, insecurity had a bigger impact for the Democratic Republic of Congo between 2018 and 2019 during the war. Their insecurity in healthcare and many health services when they were combating Ebola, especially in areas outside of state control. Vaccines and public health measures came to a halt when they were trying to control Ebola vectors. According to the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the international humanitarian law stated that healthcare in armed conflict would be protected, although the reality of the Congo situation appeared very differently. At least 424 attacks were reported on health facilities between just January and November of 2019. These horrific attacks included threats, assaults, arson attacks, and healthcare workers being abducted or even killed. While the majority of attacks on healthcare in 2019 occurred in the context of the Ebola response and in the Ebola-affected areas, many occurred in the context of the ongoing violence and insecurity just from the Civil War that affected civilians and their population. These attacks affected both the Ebola response as well as their wider provision of vital health services in the area. Similarly, Ukraine is now suffering from healthcare facilities, workers, and patients being targeted during this Russian-Ukrainian war. According to WHO, many buildings in Ukraine are having to be repurposed to care for these wounded from the war, as long with those that are suffering from illnesses like COVID-19, while all of these people are trying to flee the war. Close to 1,000 health facilities are in changed areas of control. Half of the pharmacies are closed down, and many healthcare workers are becoming displaced or even not able to work. Because of this devastation, limited to no access to medicine, facility, or health professionals is very evident. Treatments of chronic conditions have almost stopped. COVID-19 vaccinations, testings, and immunizations have come to a halt. Prior to the Russian invasion, at least 50,000 people were getting vaccinated against COVID-19 per day. During this invasion, though, only about 175,000 Ukrainians have supposedly been vaccinated. This next slide just shows a little graph about the destruction in the Congo of the Ebola. As you can see, there's threats of assaults, arson attacks, abduction, and even killings of healthcare facilities and workers.
So to summarize, the historical pandemic in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, we're going to connect the dots. Ukraine and the Democratic Republic of Congo have faced similar public health crises while also being a war-torn country. Healthcare facilities serve as targets for military officials. Local and international public health campaigns become politicized and initiatives are often stalled or abandoned entirely because it's no longer safe for healthcare workers to perform their duties or for civilians to seek and receive care. War not only displaces populations, but also sees vaccination histories. Series of vaccinations become disrupted due to conflict or become unavailable because of transportation issues. Oftentimes, important documentation gets left behind, and this has been seen in many refugees from Ukraine that are arriving in different countries. Although there is international law in place to protect healthcare programs, workers and organizations are still faced with threats, arson, abductions, and even bombings. As the authors of the PNAS article stated, controlling disease outbreaks in conflict zones is already formidable, but when healthcare providers become a target of violence, it often becomes even more daunting. As local violence is beyond the control of health professionals, it is paramount to determine how the health sector can maximize its chances of fulfilling programmatic objectives in the midst of conflict.
Here we've provided you with our information credentials. The sources that we have used are CNBC, Forbes, Washington Post, Farm Tech, Wall Street Journal, PNAS, WHO, and Security Insight in USA Today. These are news sites. Most of these are Pulitzer Prize winning news sources. We have adequately researched these and determined what type of information they include, the sources that they have given and cited, and we have used multiple sources within our presentation. Here we provide you with both sides of our works cited. Thank you.
Thank you.